No, start over again. That's all.
That's it. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, because this is going to be seen this afternoon, hopefully. We are going to have a guest on today. That's Jamie Miller of Miller Strategies, LLC, a Republican strategy company, actually. I'm not exactly sure what they do, but we will ask Jamie what they do. So Mike wanted to show off his new tie for this first
tie
interview.
will obviously bring the question up, where is Spanky?
You know that's not Spanky, right?
That's why I said, where is Spanky? This is buckwheat.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That was a that was a funny joke. Again, you don't know what a joke is, so you are humor challenged.
I'm looking at a joke when I look at you.
Well, we're waiting for this gentleman, Jamie Miller. Okay, we can have a happy thought without him.
Yeah, we should.
And here's the thing: when he shows up, we can offer him this happy thought, and between you and the audience and me, he'll think it's like original, but it'll be a bullshit second shot happy thought. And if he watches it, one or two things going to happen. Either he's going to be really pissed, which means he shouldn't come back, or he laughs his ass off, which means we'll see him again. Anyway. Wow.
You always start that way when you pick out a thing.
Yeah, but this isn't even fucking original.
All right.
I could say that. Or do we have to be clean for this guy?
No, you don't have to be clean.
Okay. The happy thought is, I've heard this 1,000. You sit your ass down.
Trying to get the lighting correct.
The volume's got to be correct. The lighting has to be correct.
We haven't done this during the day, so the lighting is...
Hey, it's nice that you're not... See, I put on my tie. You actually put on a real shirt. That's amazing. You don't have your wife beater on.
I don't even have a wife to beat.
Patience, my son. Here is the happy thought. And it's not original. Stop and smell the roses.
Stop and smell the roses?
These aren't happy thoughts. These are things to do. A happy thought is like, remember the beautiful things in your life. That's a happy thought. Okay? Not go out and do something. You know?
Well, like yesterday, put on your happy pants. I'm sorry, positive pants.
Positive pants.
A few weeks ago.
Yes. And you know what's sadder than that statement? The fact you actually remembered it. So anyway, yeah, because that's pathetic. What would Buckwheat would say? Wait a second. Where is he?
There we go.
Yeah, that's my Stan Kedison moment.
Jeez, yeah,
he was just... Man, could that guy scream? I remember this joke that he was doing. He's going, is anybody out there about to get married? And he goes up to the guy and he gets in his face. He goes, I'm married, and I want you to remember this face. And he screams as loud as he can. That was the first time I ever saw him, and I couldn't stop laughing. It was that good.
Oh, he was great, man. He was really great.
I don't know if it was great, because after a while I got tired of hearing him scream.
No, but it was...
Wasn't he in School Days or something like that?
He was in Rodney Dangerfield film, Back to School.
Right, and he was one of the teachers, right?
Yeah, he was a Vietnam vet who was suffering from PTSD.
Wow.
And he asked Dangerfield some questions and yelled at him, and Dangerfield told him what he wanted to hear, which... Hey, our guest has arrived. How are you? Wow. Nice seeing you for the first time.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was actually just working on some hurricane relief stuff. So sorry I missed your call.
Oh, no, that's okay. No problem. Michael wanted to get your reaction to his tie. This is the first time he's worn a tie on the program.
What is it? Is that buckwheat?
That's buckwheat.
God bless you, brother. See, here's the thing. This was the acid test to see if you were a hidden liberal. And since you didn't yell at me, we know that you're okay now. He's been vetted.
I've been. Oh boy. I've been called a lot of things, but I don't think throughout my whole 30-year career anyone has ever legitimately called me a liberal.
Well, you make that sound like a bad thing, but anyway.
Well, liberals no longer exist. They've been taken over by the leftists who run the Democrat Party.
Liberalism nowadays is anti-libertine.
Well, conservatives are closer to classic liberals than the so-called liberals who have hijacked the term these days.
Let's start them off with a brand new happy thought, which I'm going to pull.
No. First, I want him to introduce himself to the audience, okay? Such as our audience.
Yes, fine. Go ahead.
A happy thought. Are we recording? So yeah, the happy thought sounds like a great place to start.
We started without you.
All right, go ahead. Happy thought then.
Okay, this is brand new.
Wait, let me explain that. Mike bought this jar of happy thoughts a few weeks ago, and every show we've been starting with a happy thought.
Oh, okay.
And most of them are pretty disappointing. But
last one was put on your positive pants.
Yeah, that was yesterday, 2 days ago.
Okay.
So you're getting that one for free.
I'm not even sure what positive pants are, but okay.
We don't know.
We had half of the show was about that. But anyway, here we go. This one is very original. You probably never heard it before. Stop and smell the roses.
Okay, I can go for that.
Happy thoughts are not happy thoughts. They are.
And Your Honor, I'm ripping it up. No one will ever read it again.
Never smell the roses ever again.
Yeah. So speaking of petunias and roses and so forth, one of the biggest mistakes that we made with the last person that we had on here was we do what we normally do, which is overtalk. So I agreed with Roy that we should let you run the show.
I'm running the show now?
Yeah, you're running the show. Otherwise, we will.
What I'd like you to do is just introduce yourself and let people know who they're watching.
Yeah, right. So my name's Jamie Miller, and I've got a 30-year career in running political campaigns, mostly in Florida and the Southeast. They can find me. You can see at Rep Jam on all my social media, whether it's YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm at Rep Jam on all of those, and then I write a Substack that's called At Reasonable Arguments. And I'm the author of a book, American Speeches That Changed History.
Oh, wow.
My political background is going back to the early to mid 90s. I was the youngest Republican Party chairman in the state of Florida back when I was just kind of cutting my teeth. I went on to become the director of field operations for the Republican Party of Florida for the 2000 election and then the historic recount following the 2000 election. And so there's a lot of stories that I could talk about with that you and or your audience may be interested in. And then I was a former became executive director of the Republican Party of Florida. And then, I'll skip ahead to 2012. I was a senior advisor in Florida to Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign. And now I live in Sarasota, Florida. And which, if you don't know, it's south of Tampa Bay on the Gulf Coast of Florida, the west coast of Florida.
Wow.
And
a couple of cousins who live there.
Oh, okay. Where do they live?
You guys were hit really bad, though.
Sorry.
Milton's Eye came directly over my house, and the technical center of Milton's Eye came with a smile. The eye of the storm. I grew up in Florida. I moved from Pittsburgh when I was 10 to rural Florida, and we've always heard of the eye of the storm. You can go out in the eye of the storm, and you can see stars, and it's peaceful. And it was every bit as peaceful as you've heard. But I was so disappointed that when I went outside, I checked on some neighbors. I live in a neighborhood where we have a couple of elderly neighbors who decided to stay. So I went and checked on them and made sure they made it through easily the first half of the storm, and they did. but there were no stars. It was all cloudy, and so we didn't lose power until after the eye went through. And then we came in, and I had a reporter say, "Oh, it was a dirty eye." I was like, "The one eye of a storm I get to experience, and I didn't get to see stars." I was like, I don't know why that was important to me at the moment, but that seemed to be important. And and I didn't experience that part. I don't care to experience another eye of the storm. However, we did very well. Our bushes and trees and we're still cleaning up, landscaping, but most things have gotten back to normal. Our barrier islands, I think, if you're planning a vacation to your family here in Sarasota, you'll probably find that most hotels, Airbnbs will be ready by January 1st. So, we have a tendency to be able to work. We're kind of, I don't want to say used to these storms, because I don't know that you ever get used to them, but we have the ability to prepare and recover fairly quickly.
I'm wondering if the reason you couldn't see stars was because of the seeding that was probably taking place.
Yeah.
By the regime.
It's funny, because before the hurricanes hit this year, I found some weird story that I put on Facebook. Not a weird story. It was from, kind of it wasn't CNN or Fox News. It was something called Express. And they were talking about how in this city in China, they had what they called the laundry storm, because everybody puts their laundry out on clotheslines. And they shot rockets up into this storm that created 70-mile-per-hour winds, and everybody's laundry ended up all over the city. And so it was, and I was just like, okay, well, I threw it out there just kind of as this is interesting. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't, I always take I don't know the news source. I always kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I thought it was interesting. And then here these storms come, and everybody has this conspiracy theory. And I was like, oh, well, I don't know that it's a conspiracy theory. I think we use that word conspiracy a little too lightly, because I think that it is something the mainstream media uses to separate us and to
denigrate us.
Exactly. And so it's a theory that some people may have. I go with, when we start talking about election fraud, I use the same terminology. I was like, you can't prove that our elections are free, fair, and transparent any more than I can prove that there was fraud inside of a precinct, because, ballot election fraud is the one crime where if you get away with the crime, your evidence is erased, because if you cast an illegal ballot, it becomes a legal vote, and Americans are never going to take it out of the pile. So I use that argument with liberals all the time, just to say, if you can't, you might call me crazy because I think there's election fraud, but you can't prove that our elections are free, fair, and transparent. And, you don't have to go any further than people counting these ballots in the middle of the night with big shifts. And just because there's counting in the middle of the night does not mean there's fraud, but it does mean that they're not free, fair, and transparent.
Especially since the other side isn't there to verify the counts.
Absolutely.
Well, the whole point of a conspiracy is to do something in the dark. So if you're not part of that conspiracy, presuming there's one going on, you're going to have to theorize as to what's going on. And theory, by the way, seems to be embedded in scientific, developments and so forth. You have a theory, and then people test that theory. So all of a sudden, if it has something to do with the political element where people are upset because they happen to be somewhat attached to the outcome of it, then all of a sudden you're a kook. Right. Okay, you're a aluminum hat guy, And the thing is that because we presently live in a world where we absolutely cannot rely on any mainstream media, even secondary media, we're forced to just presume, based upon what we have. So, the problem is that you got guys like Trump, right? And Trump is accused of being the same thing. And then as time goes on, he's exonerated. But the exoneration is buried on page 32.
Yeah.
Well, also, I want to just point out that the last 4 years, the conspiracy theorists are undefeated insofar as telling the truth.
Yeah. No, I don't think
About
there's any
COVID,
question.
about
Yeah,
Wuhan, the whole thing.
I don't think there's any question. I rely a lot on my experience in the 2000 election because that was so hyper partisan. It was a college education in 37 days in and of itself, or master's or doctorate's degree in campaigning. If when you on a daily or multi times a day, I was on the phone with conference calls with Ken Melman, who became RNC chairman, or Karl Rove, or Joe Abaugh, or any of those names that people might remember from that period of time. And Ted Olson, Bolton, all those guys were actually just roaming around the halls of the building. And so if you wanted to pick somebody's brain, Ben Ginsberg, one of the best legal minds in politics, all those folks are just roaming around, what was our just party headquarters. And so you get a chance to meet and talk and really kind of throw some of these things against the wall. And, I always said that there's a few things that history will not remember because it was never really reported, that Republicans were the first ones to claim in Southeast Florida that we were being turned away from the polls. And we did that back then, as you recall. There were news cycles. There wasn't 24/7 news. You were trying to make news either by noon or by 5 p.m. Some of the local newscasts had started broadcasting at 5. And we, before the noon newscast, I think it was the ABC station down in Palm Beach, my staff was green lighted by Austin and the folks over in Texas for the governor of Texas to have a press conference to say that Republicans were being turned away from the polls. And then that afternoon, the Democrats took that narrative and put it on steroids. And looking back, it probably was a little bit of a strategic mistake to make that claim in one of the most Democratic areas of the state. But the narrative even then was that we knew that there were things going on. 2 weeks in Florida, you have 2 weeks to file your poll watchers. So you have to have poll watchers for the campaign filed with the supervisor of elections 2 weeks before the election. That's still the law today here in Florida. And we filed a bunch of poll watchers in Broward County, which is the strongest Democratic stronghold in Florida, which is where Fort Lauderdale's on the southeast, just north of Miami. Okay. And we kind of pulled a little bit of we used some I don't want to say gray areas in election law, but there was a supervisor of elections there who interpreted the law that, for instance, there were 6 people on the countywide ballot, 6 Republicans, and they allowed me to register Roy as a poll watcher in 6 different precincts. So you could be registered as a poll watcher in precincts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And for George Bush, the U.S. Senate candidate, every candidate, the sheriff, all these candidates who were on the ballot. And so Democrats didn't know where we were going to be. And instead of sitting in the poll and not being that effective in one poll, what I asked you to do, Roy, was, hey, I just want you to make the rounds to all 6 3 times during the day. Stick your head in and ask them how many people have voted. Just keep sticking your head in and ask people how many they voted. And so it's kind of like, when you have the greeter at Walmart, people knew we were watching, and we were watching every single poll in that county. And most people also don't remember from the 2000 election that while people do remember the Palm Beach County butterfly ballot, they don't remember that Broward County had 2 pages of ballots. And so, in fact, the 2 pages were more confusing than the butterfly ballot. And yet Democrats chose to, because there was a Democrat supervisor of elections who was complicit with the Democratic Party in 2000, Teresa Lepore put their efforts on election day afternoon to try to get voters to go and vote multiple times in Palm Beach County during that election. And that's what they did. And we literally had, we didn't have affidavits, but we had people who called. I still have it in my files somewhere. Not only the number of Republicans who got turned away from the polls, but the number of people who called our headquarters saying that they've been called after they voted to come back and vote again because their ballot had been messed up. And so, So there's all kinds of things that can happen if you're not watching the polls. And now I think some of that just technology has taken away the ability for just, Roy Pitted to go down and vote 2 or 3 times in the same precinct on the same day just because you have complicit poll workers who are willing to give you 2 or 3 ballots if you show up and say, "Oh, I think I messed up my ballot." But I do still think there's some level. I still think that most election fraud does happen within the precincts, and that's why I think, listen, the best way to stop fraud is to keep it from happening. And so the best way to do that is to live stream everywhere we have ballots stored, distributed, voted, collected, counted, and canvassed. So anywhere ballots are, we should be live streaming so that everybody can watch everything. And that's the only way we're going to prove to ourselves and the rest of the world that these elections are free, fair, and transparent.
Right.
Well, in Philadelphia in 2020, stopped the Republican poll workers from entering in the city of Philadelphia. They actually boarded. They covered up the windows so they couldn't observe through it.
Mm-hmm.
They had the judge had given them a written letter giving them permission to enter, and there was no consequences for that. So it's not just about recognizing fraud. It's about where's the consequences when these people are not adhering to the law. There is none. So people in general are giving up. They're losing faith in the system as a whole because there's no consequences for these wrongdoings.
And there's no consequences for lying. Like, for example, Adam Schiff.
Yeah. Well, there's been no consequences for, the lie of the Russian hoax and the treasonous behavior of Democrats impeaching a president of the United States based upon something they knew was a hoax. I mean, that's the way history is going to remember Democrats from this era, is that they were conducting treasonous activity carte blanche with the help and of the mainstream media when everybody knew that this was a false narrative. And they, because of their own personal and political gains, they decided to not only ignore it, but to exasperate the problem. So it's unfortunate that this is kind of where we are today, 1 week out from the election in 2024. But, this is where we are. And there's only one person who's capable of stopping it, and it's Donald Trump.
Nice to hear that. The thing is that indirectly, I think they have done us a service. These people that are opposed to liberty, okay, and that is that they've become so callous. They've done their wrongdoings to such an extent that it is difficult to deny that they're doing it. And people
they're not even denying it anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, they reframe it, in various ways. Like, I'll give an example. Donald Trump wants to go ahead and increase tariffs, right? They're calling that a tax hike. They're saying, yeah, Donald Trump is going to raise everything because he's going to tariff these cats. When in fact, the tariffs actually protect our economics.
Well, there's many ways to look at that. Until 1913.
Say that again?
This country was built on tariffs until 1913, when they put the unconstitutional IRS into effect. And we had roads, we had schools, we had everything we needed. Everything the federal government was allowed to spend on was being spent on through tariffs.
Wait a second. Did we have an internet at that time? No, we did not. We had no internet, no cell phone service.
Hey, they've spent, I forget how many billions of dollars trying to get internet to rural areas. And now Trump came along and said, hey, Elon, why don't we just give him Starlink?
Oh, my God.
Not one house has been given internet. They've been running cables and cables and cables for years, but nothing's been connected. And now Starlink, he's going to connect everything that way.
Well, hey, here's the good news. They don't need the internet anymore for communications. The ATF will be knocking on your door with writs, so this way you'll be able to communicate with the government directly.
If the Democrats win, they won't even need writs to come and knock on our doors. Okay, you and I are going to be
more efficient. Very green, because you'll be saving money on paper.
Yeah, well, you and I will be relegated to a little 10 by 10 square foot room with 3 other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you and I will be in a gulag somewhere, along with Jenny. Yeah.
Apparently so. I guess we're going to share a
Yeah, Jamie is now.
room.
Now you're probably going to be on the same terror list we're on.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah. But the thing is, he knows more people than we do, so we got a better shot hanging out with him.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know about that. It's I always say half of life is who you're standing next to, right?
Oh, yeah. But the thing is that that triggered something in me. That little conversation, those little jokes, and I remembered the betrayal that took place in the southern states after the second hurricane hit, and how FEMA and all these sons of bitches interfered with the actually denied people that were actually in the process of recovery. They took Elon Musk his Starlink stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And then FEMA says, I'm sorry, we don't have any money. We didn't plan for this. Where'd the money go? It went on the border.
Yeah, there's no question that if Harris goes on to lose this election, that's probably the not the hurricane, but the reaction to it.
Right.
Her reaction saying, having a cabinet secretary come out and say, there's not enough money for recovery for Americans. And then when people started saying, oh, what, but you're spending billions on illegal immigrants to put them in hotels and all this other, that's not recovery efforts. That's a different FEMA program. And, I think you and I and anybody who pays our taxes, we don't get to choose which programs our tax dollars go to. We can't say, hey, I want my tax dollars to go to hurricane recovery, but not to illegal immigrants who are staying in luxury hotels in New York City. And so it's disingenuous at best for them to say, oh, there's money for them, but there's not money for us. And right. I think that's kind of the closing argument for Donald Trump is that, hey, Donald Trump is for us and Kamala Harris is for them and they.
Well, the thing is, they're not even illegal. They're not even illegal immigrants. They're trespassers. They're felons.
Invaders.
Cross the border illegally, they become felons.
They are invaders.
And the fact that Democrats want to give them the ability to vote because they do not have the right to vote, I always argue that why don't we let tourists vote? I mean, if somebody happens to be here on election day from Germany, what the hell? Let's just let a German vote in our election. I mean, if we're going to let foreigners, listen, our system's based upon not allowing foreign money involved in our elections, right? And we all know that's kind of BS, but foreign own American companies and they funnel money through American companies, but legally you're not allowed to have foreign money influence domestic elections, and yet Democrats support foreigners to influence domestic elections. And so I was like, well, what the hell? If somebody wants to fly from Germany or England or God, just come over from Canada for the day and vote.
Or even come over, just send the ballots.
Yeah, why not? Just mail them all across the world. Let people in Japan vote. Who cares? Yeah, right. Like, what's the point? Like, why should we be trusted as American citizens to decide our leader?
Well, we don't. The Democrats
country in the world does it, but we can't.
Yeah.
The Democrats proved that we don't choose our leader. They pushed Kamala Harris in front of the American people. Was she brought in by votes? No. She was the de facto runner.
She's the puppet of the day.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. This final week will be interesting because
the problem is the puppeteer is going to really have to clean his arm when he gets finished. Yes, that's where we go.
Well, since we went there, I did a project one time that I set up an LLC for one project only and I was working with a partner on it. And so we just said, hey, let's just set up an own company because we're only going to work on this project for about 8 weeks. And we called it Brown Rabbit Consulting, because when you absolutely positively have to pull a rabbit out of your ass, you have to call on us. And
Yep.
so we did this project under Brown
Well,
Rabbit
he fits right in with
Consulting.
this podcast. I do have a few questions that I came up with. I don't know if they're going to be relevant.
It's not a dating service.
No. One. No, I'm not going to ask
Make
anybody.
sure you have the right question, Roy. Be
Well,
real
first off,
careful.
why did explain to the viewers why this podcast? Why did you come on to our podcast?
So
I know the answer you already told me, but tell everybody else and tell Mr. Smarty Pants here.
So I'll tell you a little secret. I have an AI program that goes out and finds podcasts that and it finds all kinds of podcasts, like progressive, liberal, but most of them have to do with politics. And then it says, oh, this might be a podcast you'd be interested in. And I watch a little bit of it. And then I send an email saying, hey, I'd like to be on. And, I'm not a Donald Trump surrogate. That's why I can kind of say little stories like Brown Rabbit Consulting without the wrath of the campaign coming down on me. I do not get daily talking points from them. I don't do anything, but I've been involved long enough that I felt like I wanted to make a difference in this election. And so whether that was, I thought about doing my own podcast, and instead of doing that, I thought, well, why don't I just reach out to people who are doing it, and small and large, small audiences, large audiences, and regardless of where they are, if I can get on it. I think I'm up to, since late July, I think I've been on about 40 different podcasts. And so I ran across you guys, and you guys were nice enough to have me on.
Well, that strategy follows along with the Soros strategy, where instead of spending $50 million, for example, on a presidential election, no, he spends $50 million on hundreds of local elections and influences things on the local level, which is why we have so much crap going on in Democrat-run cities these days.
I wrote in my blog or Substack, Reasonable Arguments, that I felt like Trump should have, and I didn't say podcasts at the time, but when I wrote it, I said, I felt like his large rallies were being counterproductive. And I thought they do great for TV, but I thought that they would wane in interest because they're all the same show, right? How many times can you see the same show? And so I suggested at that time that, Donald Trump says, and they're expensive. They're super expensive. And I like, hey, you should spend your money on grassroots and, instead go to local reporters on local TV stations and talk to trusted local reporters about local issues and in swing states. And so after my wife read that, she's like, well, isn't that, aren't podcasts like the new local reporters? And I'm like, yeah, of course. So that kind of then,
that's what put
that was kind of the beginning of it. And then I was at the Republican National Convention. So leading up to the convention, I reached out to some podcasts, both big and small, like, hey, I'll throw an email at Joe Rogan. Of course, he never responded. But, and then I have been on some pretty big shows like Mark Thompson's show out of Los Angeles. He's a radio announcer out there and has a podcast, and he's the voice of American Idol, the TV show. And, so I've been on, and he's progressive, but we had a very nice conversation, and he was reasonable and I was reasonable. And we disagreed on some things and we agreed on some things. And, so I just felt like this was kind of a way for me to do my part. And here in Sarasota, there's a couple of guys a lot like yourself, George Ayton and Frank Patty, who have me on their radio show once a month. And I always say, I was like, this is the most important time I get to talk to 200 listeners. And so I don't know how many people listen, but it's a little tiny show in Northport, Florida on an AM radio station. But I go down and do it because I enjoy them and I enjoy doing it. And at some level, I hope it makes a difference for the election.
Well, now that you've been on our podcast here, I don't see why Joe Rogan is going to turn you down.
Yeah,
yes.
He's got to take me. He's got to take me.
Right. And that's not because
the lowest to the highest.
And I want you to understand in regards to the way that Roy talks. That's not that's not because Joe Rogan would see this as a significant podcast and then want you in. It's because he doesn't have the capacity to come up with a reason. But anyway, I was at one Trump rally in 2020 in Wilkes-Barre, and that's when Governor, Doug Mastriano was running for governor, who I voted for. And the thing is that it was, again, it was an overwhelming experience. So what it does, as far as I was concerned, was solidify those people that are there and to basically have them experience what it's like to be in a MAGA crowd. And it's almost a religious experience. You know, I know that sounds cultist, but you're there with all these people, a like mind, like spirit, and it just frees you for a second. For a second, you don't feel alone.
Judged, yeah.
Now, I wear a MAGA hat outside the house almost everywhere, except for when I'm doing business. And strangers come up to me. I even have a nickname that people gave me called MAGA Mike. And yeah, they thought it was an insult, and I thought it was a compliment. But anyway, the thing is that complete strangers come up to me, especially in the past couple of months. Some of them very, very unhappy, and some of them just patting me on the back and giving me the thumbs up. But when you consider the fact that I might walk down the street and in the course of a day get 6 or 7 of those people giving me the high sign or patting me on the back and thanking me for the hat, and sometimes having significant conversations. This is in Pennsylvania. You know, the MAGA people have been lied to. They've been told that they are insignificant and white supremacist, whatever. When in fact, they are vast. As a matter of fact, many people of color come up to me and say it, you know, and I reach out to them a little bit harder because I need to get that message out that MAGA is for everybody, you know? So I do believe that Donald Trump's events are solidifying for his movement. It may not be the traditional method, but then again, he does break a lot of rules. I mean, I initially voted against Hillary Clinton, and he was all I had. And the only thing he had going for me, in my mind, was that he was very outspoken. And I felt that was refreshing.
Sure.
And then later on, I grew to know him better. And then I didn't like his personality at all. But I thought he was bombastic, and I liked that. But the thing is, as time went on and I saw some of the wonderful things that he did, I realized that he was a good person and not... It sounded initially like he was full of it, you know, that he was just patting himself on the back and everything, but he has plenty of reasons to crow. And, you know, so I got to like him. I wish to some extent he wasn't so extreme, but at the same time, that's what makes him. So you got to it's kind of like being married. You got to take the good with the bad.
I always use the analogy of my first boss in politics. And my first boss was what we called an old pork chopper in Florida. And an old pork chopper was a North Florida good old boy who just wouldn't say no to a good pork chop dinner anywhere he needed to go to get elected, right? So,
oh wow!
And so
I thought he was talking about Portuguese, like pork chops.
Yeah,
like me.
So he's so in North Florida we have this term of endearment for our North Florida southern good old boy politicians, and it's a pork chopper, and he was legendary. He ran back in the day. He was a Democrat state senator. Back then in the late 60s, when he switched to the Republican Party, if you switched before the election, you had to resign. And so he felt so strongly about the Republican Party and against Democrats that he resigned his state Senate seat and ran as a Republican and won. Then he ran for statewide office in 1970 and lost. And I first went to work for him in 1998. So he was a pretty young man when he was in office. And my boss came up to me and he puts his arm around me and he said, and we all use the term Boss Slade for Tom Slade as a term of endearment. And he comes and puts his arm around me. He's like, Jamie, All you need to know is that you work for Boss Slade now. And Boss Slade will lead us through fire. Now, by God, he sets half of them, but he will lead us through. And that's Donald Trump. And the truth of the matter is, he will lead us through fire. Yeah, does he set some of the fires? Yeah, he does. But there's not a single person out there voting for Kamala Harris who believes she can lead us through fire. And they know damn good and well that she's going to set a bunch of them. And so there's no confidence that she has the capabilities of leading the country or being commander in chief. She has run a campaign based on three things: race, gender, and hatred for Donald Trump, and dividing Americans. And, I certainly hope that somebody who wants to be president of the United States doesn't win based on that type of pettiness.
Well, what strikes me as odd is that the people in New Jersey and New York hate the way Donald Trump speaks, they say. Meanwhile, they all speak that way. They're all very blunt. They're very insulting at times. And they speak to each other that way. And they don't like it that this man who's running for president speaks that way. Now, I always also remember, ever since I was a kid, people saying that politicians always lie. They never tell you what they're really thinking and so forth. Donald Trump, that's why I liked him, was because he was telling us what he thought, what he wanted to do. And he was following through on his promises as much as he could against all the opposition. And I couldn't understand why people who complained for years about getting politicians lying to them all the time didn't like a guy who was telling you what he was doing and doing it.
I think if we're looking at voters making a decision, those voters who have yet to make a decision on who they're going to vote here in the last week, it's just like anybody else who's making a big decision. They want certainty. If you're buying a house, you want to go have it inspected and make sure that, there's not a lot of damage that needs to be done when you buy the house. If you're buying a car, the same thing. And people want certainty. And voting for somebody is no different. And I think the reason why the last week of this campaign, I predict, will trend towards Donald Trump is this word certainty. Not because people like Donald Trump, because a lot of people don't. My dad voted for Donald Trump. He hates him. He's like, I think he's not a good human being. But we've had some jerks and some not so good human beings who served as president of the United States and served admirably. And I think what people will decide is, am I gonna get what I'm buying? And I think whether you like or hate Donald Trump, you know what you get. And if you like or hate Kamala Harris, even those who like her they cannot articulate what the next 4 years will look like at all under her. I mean, it's bizarre that she has as much of a following as she has, but the most of her following is based upon Donald Trump. My wife, for instance, she's not very political. She's put once a week on her Facebook for like the last 3 weeks, can you tell me why you're supporting Kamala Harris without mentioning Donald Trump? And they cannot do it. They cannot do it. There's no reason to vote for Kamala Harris unless you just hate Donald Trump.
I can explain that. These people are suffering from Kamala Harris voting syndrome. It's a strain of Trump derangement syndrome. The thing is that I was talking to Roy about this the other day. That there's a certain herd mentality that's associated in the Democrats at this point, where you go along to get along. You don't want to be an outsider. I knew somebody like that. But one of the things I wanted to mention before we finish this thing, and Roy can attest to this, I have a kind of spiritual side, okay? And that may not be self-evident. But anyway, the thing is that in the last few months, I've been using Bible-level descriptions of some of these people and saying, that person is behaving demonically, or that is just a horribly corrupt way of being. And there are elements that are taking place in this country that are so perverse, that are so corrupt, that are so anti-nurturing, that they look evil. And there's people out there, there's religious leaders that are saying that this isn't just a political issue. This is a battle that's taking place in spirit. There's a godly side and there's a satanistic side. And I don't like mentioning that to the average person because that'll definitely lose people. But from a descriptive point of view, I think a lot of those descriptions fit. You know, there's some horrible things going on in this anti decency political group. And I've never been really a big fan of conservative decency. But I hate to say it, I'm starting to listen to Ted Cruz and going, yeah, you know, it's like guys like that are like Charlie Kirk. When he speaks his religious stuff, I'm going, I don't necessarily agree with that terminology, but I have to agree with him all in spirit. You know, it's like,
I think a good policy example of what you're describing is the 300,000 unaccompanied children that our border czar has lost. And the fact that 300,000, that's the size of Pittsburgh, that's the population of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And, you know, we have 300,000 children who came across without parents, without adult supervision, who illegally entered our country, and our country does not know where they're at. In fact, our own Department of Homeland Security says that these 300,000 kids are probably either dead, enslaved, or being sex trafficked. And for a party that supposedly is to be so helpful to children and care and be liberal, and this not to be an issue at all in this campaign is mind-boggling to me. That, you know, quote, the border czar lost 300,000 children. We don't even know where they're at. We don't know if they're criminals. We don't know if they're victims of criminals. We don't know anything. And those are just the children.
yes.
Yeah.
And if we as a government can't stand up for children, we've kind of lost our way. And if the mainstream media can't stand up for children, it's lost its way. And it's to me, that is one of the issues in this campaign it saddens me greatly. Number one, that 300,000 children would come here, however far they had to come. And we can speculate if somebody paid
They
for
were
them or
being
whatever.
given to people.
Go ahead.
Sorry, they were being given over to people who claimed to be their father or uncle or whatever, and there was no proof. And Biden had stopped the DNA testing that Trump had in place.
Right.
And let's not forget the cartels moving into Native American territories in the United States and using them as hubs for their drug operations.
Well, not even Native American. I mean, we can look at Aurora, Colorado, where Venezuelan gangs control apartment complexes, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's not that big a deal." And
only a few.
And
it's
only six.
Yeah, like I don't understand that, and did
you hear anything new about what the Hells Angels were doing down there?
If they ever went, I don't think they went. I think that was rumor. Yeah. I want to get back to what you said about some people just dislike Donald Trump because they think he's a bad person and so forth. You said somebody in your family can't stand him but is voting for him. Well, after Trump appeared on the Gutfeld show last week, he did about a 30-some-odd minute interview with Tyrus. Mm-hmm. And Tyrus brought out some things that most people don't know that Trump has done over the years, without trying to take credit for anything. Tyrus brought it up. Also, he brought out how when they went backstage after the Gutfeld show, he thought he was going to be just like any other politician and so forth. And he said, you spent 20 minutes talking to my daughter. And he said, if anybody didn't know, they would have thought you were her grandfather. Talked about her horses or aspirations and so forth. He said, he's just a nice guy, grandfatherly type. And people don't know this because of his bombastic.
I had one experience with him where I had probably a 30-minute conversation with him and one other in 2015. And if you remember, prior to him announcing for president in 2015, he spoke in Sarasota, and a friend of mine worked on the campaign, asked me to do the advance, which I did. I went the day before. I did so as a volunteer, and took their security guard around. This is how we're going to move them to the green room and everything. And so then we ended up in the day of the event. I went out to the airport, picked him up, and brought him back. We move him through the thing. He ends up in the green room with me and Corey Lewandowski. And my experience with him was I don't want to say spectacular, but it was a very, we had a short conversation, 30 minutes, but it was one of the more intelligent conversations about political campaigning, the economy, and a lot of things. I told him at that point, I was like, listen, I'm a blue collar economist. I grew up, my dad was a minister, my mom's a social worker. I don't know how I ended up in politics. I kind of just had a passion for it. And then people started paying me to help them get elected. And so it's just kind of, I don't want to say it was ever like a thought. It wasn't like, oh, this is what my family does, right? We're not politicians. And so, I was like, I'm a blue collar economist. And if you have cheap gas, if you have cheap oil, you have cheap gas. And if you have cheap gas, you have cheap food. And between energy and food, that's what most wars are fought over. And people are happier. They have more money to go on vacation. They have more money to spend Christmas with their kids. And so that was part of our conversation that we had. But the more important part that your audience may be interested in is that he started peppering me with questions. Just question after question, like just rapid fire questions. And I'm, and I'm an election expert and an expert on Florida politics. And he just kept, and the thing that I sat back with after that happened was that I've had that experience with a lot of candidates, right? They ask me questions, but with him, every question, and then I would answer, led to what I would have called the next most intelligent question. And he immediately went to the most intelligent question that he should ask next to get the best information. And he just did it.
What sort of questions? I mean, if you
a lot of it was about mail-in ballots. A lot of it had to do with the influence of non-English speaking voters in Florida. We ran the gamut of a lot of things. The I-4 corridor versus why did Romney do better in cities than Kane, and then Romney fail miserably in rural areas, not fail. I mean, he won those rural areas, but he just didn't win them as well as he should have. And so we just talked about all of those things. And it was I found him to be an incredibly smart man.
I have a very important question to ask you in regards to what you just said. After speaking to Trump, after recognizing all that, did you put on your positive pants?
Well, I did stop and smell the roses.
Yesterday's happy thought.
We're getting a lot of mileage out of that one.
This podcast is I mean, we can't do anything seriously for too long because then our heads will explode. So we have to throw humor in once in a while. Even inane humor like Mike is specialist at.
You just said it was extremely important, and that's why I interjected. Anyway, so the thing is that I just presumed that he was intelligent based upon his behaviors. But the fact that you actually interacted with him and you actually had dialogue with him and you actually concluded that he had a very logical form to his process, that pleases me greatly. But I kind of proved that in my own mind, but you just confirmed that. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, I originally supported him because, first and foremost, he was not a career politician.
Mm-hmm.
That was my main reason for supporting him back in 2016.
I think. Can we talk about Vance? Because Vance is. I'm.
Wait, Jimmy. Do you have time? I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to keep you from anything important.
Yeah.
Work and stuff like that, but that's okay. No, I'm good.
Okay,
we're big on bullshit.
Let's talk about Vance. Who I think everybody was shocked and like, who is this guy? And now I think most people on the Republican side do like the guy, especially after his performance. Against Kamala and moderators.
He was amazing against Waltz because Waltz had a poor performance, but maybe that made him look even better. But the fact of the matter is that he knew, he was so familiar with Trump's choices and actions and so forth like that, his history, et cetera, et cetera. I can't imagine anybody being that familiar with somebody else's work. And that's what blew me away, that he was so,
He's knowledgeable.
he was so intelligent.
That debate, I think, was one of the turning points in the campaign, just because you saw kind of the difference of, I think you saw a new, we're in Florida, so we have a young governor, Ron DeSantis, who we've loved and been, we've seen him over the last 6 years perform over and over and over again. So we kind of have a pretty good view of what the future of the Republican Party and conservatism can look like, and how that can be fair to all people, and how it can, like we've always said, a rising tide lifts all boats. And Ron DeSantis has done that. And I think that people saw that also with J.D. Vance, with kind of, hey, here's the future of the Republican Party. And regardless of what happens with, next Tuesday, we're going to, the Republican Party is in good hands with the people who are stepping up to the plate.
If it can survive a Kamala regime,
well,
which
hopefully that does not happen.
I don't think Republicans would be around, because they've accelerated their globalist takeover the last during the Biden years, and I see no reason for them to slow down.
Well,
Because
the one thing that people do vote for is their pocketbooks. And in my blog, I wrote one thing about, I call it the red state recovery. And when you start looking at economic numbers, the mainstream media and everybody likes to talk about, these national numbers, the national numbers. But the truth of the matter is, Florida, Texas, and Ohio are leading indicators on all positive economic numbers. And it's because we have conservative leadership at the state level in those three large economies. Florida, if it were an economy unto itself, I think it'd be the 13th largest economy in the world. And Texas is in a similar boat. Ohio, a little bit farther down the list. But when you start looking at leading, you start looking at New York, Illinois, and California, you have leading in economic indicators in Republican states, and you have lagging economic indicators in Democratic states. And so, it's not to say that national policy doesn't impact those things, but I think it shows clearly when you start looking at things like that, how state conservative policies can be a firewall against an intrusive federal government.
Well, when New York State decided to treat Trump in the courts the way they did, they lost so many entrepreneurs. Like in California, they lost Elon Musk and they lost other entrepreneurs. Why? Because when people realize that you're anti-capitalism, then there's no reason to be a capitalist in that state. So it's like, it's funny. It's like the left is very clever in certain ways, but their misreading of the American people is causing them to downfall.
I don't know that they're misreading the American people. I think more, instead of misreading, disregarded.
Oh,
yes,
people who live in rural areas. If you're from a red state, I mean, the Biden administration, you can go back and look time and time again of the tiny negative things that come out of that administration that are anti-Florida and anti-Texas, especially anti-Texas and anti-Florida. And they're trying to drive people from visiting Florida, from being a tourist here. And, just also, I mean, little tiny things that they don't come out of the West Wing of the White House. It comes out of the Department of Agriculture or the EPA or wherever. And it's just really a shame that Biden and Obama have weaponized our federal government against not only conservatives, but against conservative states.
Well, recently, Biden signed an executive order allowing the American military to open fire on American citizens.
Antifa? No,
they won't do that.
No,
they're not American citizens anyway. They're
So I say
anti-American.
another good example. And it's just sorry that this popped into my head, and I hope it's not too bad of a tangent. But about 9 months or a year ago, remember all the gangs were taking over Haiti, and everyone's like, "Oh, Haitians are fleeing. They're fleeing to Florida." And Ron DeSantis stood up and said, "You're not coming here. Don't come
Mhm.
here. We're going to turn you right around. We're going to put our boats in the water. If the Coast Guard won't do it, if the Navy won't do it, the state of Florida will turn you around and you're not stepping foot in our state." And so what ended up happening? Haitians didn't get in boats and come here. Part of the rhetoric does matter. And if you say that we're closing our southern border, people will stop risking their lives to get there. And so it's so do we need to build a wall? Sure, we need to build a wall. But we certainly have to have somebody who's willing to say, "Hey, don't come illegally. If you're going to come, here's the process."
Well, the wall is certainly diminishes the amount of expenditure of energy that the people that are there to protect the border. It frees them up to some extent. But ultimately, the laws that allow these people to run around, and you got, what is it, over 300,000 illegals were flown in via taxpayers' money by plane.
At least.
Jesus,
That was
come
last
on, give
year's.
me a freaking break. It's like that's insanity. But you get pissed off over at Texas for sending some busloads of people to a place where they've been living
Sanctuary
carefree.
City.
Yeah, supposedly you're a sanctuary city, so I guess you're getting extra money for that, right? So all of a sudden, here comes some illegals, and
Florida, we outlawed sanctuary cities. I'm not sure exactly what they are or what they mean anymore, other than you can come to our cities, do what you want, and not be prosecuted.
Yep.
And not be handed over to ICE because you're illegal.
Well, it all started with that George Floyd garbage, where they basically had a career criminal as Saint Floyd, and then the policeman who held him at bay by putting his knee on the guy's shoulder was held as a murderer. So we've demonized the policeman again, and of course that gave the left the opportunity to riot and burn 48 of our largest cities and create these little groups of people that could run into department stores and stuff and steal whatever they want. And if you try to stop them, you're arrested. So all of a sudden, law-abiding citizens were now treated as felons, and felons were now treated as I don't know, Christmas elves. So it's like, I mean, everything's upside down. We need to bring law and order back.
Yeah, that's why it's important for Americans to realize that when, and we go through this with hurricanes, right? And Floridians know this. And, for instance, I think there's a 3-day waiting period or whatever to buy a handgun. That gets waived as a hurricane approaches because our federal and state governments look every American or every Floridian in the eye and say, "Hey, a hurricane's coming. You have to plan on a week by yourself. You have to plan on a week with no government support, no ambulance, no police, no nothing." And, and so Floridians kind of have this free spirit about, hey, we're kind of pro-gun and we're pro-liberty because we know that, listen, when the power goes off, there's only one person who's here to protect you, and that's you. And too many people have forgotten that. They think that government, this goes back to the Rodney King and Reginald Denny beating. The police had those blocks surrounded. They could have gone in and stopped that beating of Reginald Denny, but the police don't have a responsibility to individuals. Police have a responsibility to society. And so what we've learned in Florida during hurricanes is when society breaks down, and it could break down because of a natural disaster, in the analogy I'm using, that the only person who's able and responsible for protecting you and your family is you. And government wants to ensure that all these folks are, that you can't protect yourself, and they don't want you to protect yourself from the government or from bands of Venezuelans running through Aurora, Colorado.
Well, yeah, a sheriff in one of those counties that was hit by the hurricane confiscated citizens' guns.
That's
Why?
been numerous times.
Yeah,
Yeah, but they did that in Louisiana years ago under when Katrina hit, and they saw how bad that was. But this sheriff, who's a Democrat, okay, he confiscated everybody's guns, everybody whose guns he could find. That doesn't make sense in something like this. You're going to have roving bands of bandits coming
well,
around
and I've written in
doing
my
more.
Substack, and I'm a gun nut, but I don't necessarily have a ton of guns. But I've written in my Substack, why I want a gun with a 30-round magazine, and Democrats say, well, those are weapons of war, and I was like, you never know when the war is going to end up in your driveway, because I had that happen to me one night where 3 men were in my driveway trying to break into my car, and I go and grab my pistol, and I just have a revolver, so a little 6-shooter, and
All you need.
it's not little. It'll put a big hole in you, but it only has 6. And so, and I thought to myself, I know from my cameras that there's 3 people out there, and I have 6 bullets. If they have just for automatic pistols that
Or shotgun.
they hold 13 rounds, I'm outnumbered in bullets by 39-6. And I sat at my door with the pistol in my hand, and I did the math, and I said, you know what? I don't want to be outnumbered 39-6. I had already called the police. They had started to move on to the next day. The doors of my cars were locked. They had started to move on. And I thought the better part of valor was protecting the inside of my home rather than
Right.
confronting them outside the home. And they were caught. One of them was caught. They did not. The one that was caught did not have a gun on him when he got caught. But it just, you never know. You never know when that war, because it's only a war if somebody's shooting at you, right? Why would I not need a weapon, a gun of war, when you cannot tell me that a war is not going to show up in my driveway?
Even if he didn't have a gun, he could have had a screwdriver or a hammer.
Yeah.
Okay? A motorcycle gang, I think the Hells Angels, their favorite weapon is a ball-peen hammer, which they need to repair their motorcycles, so it's legal to carry. But if you use it against a person, it automatically can be described as an assault weapon.
Sure.
I read a book on the subject, and it was by a reputable person. I think it was a Dube. And statistically, a person with a knife is more likely to attack you than a person with a handgun, because a person with a knife is more willing to do a heinous attack than a person with a gun. A person with a gun wants their distance, where a person with a knife wants to feel it. So they're actually more motivated, supposedly. So according to the book, they said if they're within 15 feet, you shoot the person with the knife first, because his reaction time and everything is almost instantaneous.
Well, they can get to you, but by the time you draw your gun and fire, they can have stabbed you already.
Right, exactly. So the
There's
thing
a
is,
name for that thing.
not engaging somebody and for personal property is not a bad choice, and
Illegal in New
securing
Jersey.
the interior, that makes sense. You had a revolver, and to be honest with you, I think that's a superior form of firearm because of the fact that because it's a revolver, if you get a dud round, which does happen, you've got 5 more rotating around. And if it's a 38 or a 350, probably had a 38. If it's a 38,
Or
that
357.
historically has proven itself to be more than capable. The thing is that ultimately what it comes down to is personal resolve. I read this in the same book. I read that you observe the situation, you figure out what all your choices are, and if necessary, you advance and do not retreat. Because he said, surprisingly, statistically, a high level of resolve is unnerving. And actually, I witnessed that myself. What happened was I was in a situation. Guy pulled a knife on me, and I have some martial experience. I took a stance, okay, and the guy was unnerved because he had pulled a knife and he thought I would crumble. And what happened was he took off because he figured if I wasn't afraid of his knife, then I was too dangerous to mess with. Okay.
Something similar happened to me years ago when some guy cut me off. I blew the horn at him. He stops, comes out of his pickup truck with a tire iron, right? And I
Wow.
had my nunchucks in the car at the time, which were still legal in New Jersey. About a year later, they made it illegal. I came out, I just, boom, put it under my arm. I didn't know what, I mean, I could use it a little bit, but very limited, not like Bruce Lee. And I stood there in a stance like that. He looked at me, turned around, and went back in his truck.
First of all, Roy, I have to applaud you for being humble enough to admit that you were not as good with the nunchucks as Bruce Lee. Not like Bruce Lee.
Yeah,
I wasn't.
he was slightly better than I was. Yeah. Hey, at least I'm not like my friend Ray. He said he was practicing at home with it and he twirled it around and he knocked himself out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I practice with actually, I practice with nunchucks pretty much every morning when I was living in Las Vegas. But I was doing it, believe it or not, for aerobic exercise. I thought it was a great aerobic exercise. Moving back, I used to sweat like an animal doing nunchucks so I never really thought of it specifically as a. My instructor pretty much talked me out of using nunchucks because it's very difficult to determine how they're going to respond when they hit a target.
Yeah.
They have a tendency of bouncing in various directions. So.
Do you ever hit yourself in the head?
Yeah.
That explains a lot.
Wow, you set yourself up.
Explains why I'm friends with you.
Mike, you walked right into it.
That was one thing I mentioned. That was one thing I mentioned the other day in the last podcast we did. I said, I feel sorry for people who can't laugh at themselves. Mike and I insult each other regularly, and I feel that people who can't laugh at themselves have to have such a miserable existence.
Right,
you know?
And thank God Roy's breaking out of his shell and laughing occasionally.
You know what? The thing you said about Florida, about DeSantis telling the Haitians not to come and so forth, that under the 4th article of the Constitution is legal. Now, the Biden regime has been fighting Texas because they want to keep they want to use their National Guard and so forth to keep illegals out. And Biden keeps fighting them. But under the Constitution, that is one of the non-enumerated powers that Texas has. If the federal government does not do its duty and defend the state has a right to defend itself.
Well, I think that's without question, in my opinion. But of course, they've tried to do, get courts to overturn that.
Yeah.
Even a mouse has a right to defend itself. I don't see any reason why a human being or a city or a state or a nation doesn't have the right to defend itself.
He's talking about that because he caught 11 mice recently.
13.
What'd you do with them, Mike?
I sent them to Roy.
I didn't realize that was going to be the tough question of the day. What'd you do with the mice, Mike?
Well, the thing is that he wants to move to Haiti, so he's practicing.
Oh boy.
Hey, well, yeah, I'd have to take a lot of ammunition because I'd need a lot of target practice down there. I should have asked you this in the beginning. What does a strategist do? I should have asked you first.
What do you do? Other than hang out on a Tuesday morning with a couple guys from Pennsylvania?
No, he's Pennsylvania. I'm behind enemy lines in New Jersey.
Okay.
He fled New Jersey a few years ago because of the gun laws.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I work with political candidates and causes, conservative candidates and causes, to win political campaigns. And that's it in a nutshell. I also work on local government relations. So that some of my clients have been engineers or construction or nonprofits, associations, associations, or I'm working on one now that's called Restore Midnight Pass, which is a pass going from a bay to the Gulf of Mexico that man closed back in the 80s, and we've been fighting for 40 years to try to make it a navigable waterway, or at least to have a tidal exchange of water from the Gulf of Mexico in Little Sarasota Bay. So I work with community leaders and government leaders and staff to try to work those angles to make sure my client gets kind of what they want and need.
And what is there a process to what you do, or is it you have to wing it depending on what you're trying to promote?
I think number one, there is a process. I mean, running a political campaign is a scientific activity, but it is based a little bit on experience, right? So for instance, that's why polls are all over that's why every poll doesn't say the exact same thing, right? Because a pollster can, for instance, in Florida, we have an abortion amendment on the ballot, and we have a recreational marijuana ballot on the ballot. So a Republican pollster could say in a presidential year, it's really not going to affect turnout, which is kind of where I'm at. It may affect Democrat turnout, maybe 1%. But a Democrat pollster could say, you know what, I really think that these things are going to make people enthusiastic about going to the polls. So 4% of Democrats are going to show up more than Republicans, or more than historically can be proven. And so then you run your poll using those numbers. And so that's where you kind of see some of these numbers say, oh, well, Trump is up, Harris is up. For instance, if you look at polling error from the 2020 campaign, Trump is going to sweep the 7 swing states and have a big electoral victory. But if you go to 2022 and you look at the polling error that occurred there, Kamala Harris wins all 7 swing states and will have a huge electoral victory. And I always kind of use the golf analogy. Over the last couple of election cycles, these pollsters have, they've lined up straight and they've hit left, and they've lined up straight and they've hit left, and they've lined up straight and they hit left. So do you continue as a golfer, kind of the Saturday morning hacker? Do you still kind of line up so you hit your ball straight, or do you start to say, okay, I'm hitting it left, so I'm going to turn to the right, and then hopefully I kind of move it back into the middle? Most pollsters,
that's right.
It doesn't work, because that's the time you hit it straight, right? And so, so you always line up to hit it straight. And so all these pollsters, if you ask them today, they're going to be like, I stand by my poll, I'm hitting it straight this time. And we'll see on Tuesday whether or not they hit it straight, or if they were hitting it, left all the time. And I know that one of the pollsters I trust, I recently wrote about it in Nevada, that Trump is above 50% and outside the margin of error. And, if Trump's winning Nevada, he's winning Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Now, that doesn't mean he wins the election, because he still has to win one of the 3.
I can tell you that in Pennsylvania, I would have to say, certainly in my area, the Lehigh Valley area, it's predominantly Trump.
Mm-hmm.
That's based upon my communications and seeing signs up and things like that.
Well, I think when you start looking at places like Philadelphia and historical Democratic voters like young African American men who, they're not, Trump's not going to win a majority, but if he wins 20 to 24% of African American men under the age of 40, he probably wins the election. Although you could make the argument, if Kamala Harris wins white women by more than 7 or 8 points, which is about where she's polling, that she could win the election. And so, so these polls are not necessarily what I like to look at are more trend lines from the same pollster. It really doesn't matter if Trump is up 3 today. It matters, was he up 3 2 weeks ago, and now then a week ago he was up 2 and now he's up 1. And if one pollster shows Trump, trending that way, then then you can pretty much track that trend. Does that mean necessarily that he's going to win? No. But it does mean that the election is trending in his direction. And certainly until the Madison Square Garden event, that they've been able to make hay over. And I don't know that it's a big as big a deal as the mainstream media is making this comedian and the joke and all those sorts of things. But certainly that is the biggest thing that's happening in the Harris-Trump campaign today. And that's I don't think a good sign for Harris, because she still has not made the sale to the American people of who she is, what she stands for, and what she's going to do as president. One day she says, I'm going to do everything Joe Biden did. And the next day I'm going to be a completely different president than Joe Biden. And if you believe her when she says that, I'm going to be a completely president than Joe Biden. We all know there's not a single person who even speculates that Kamala Harris is going to be more liberal than Joe Biden. And so, and Joe Biden, is so moderate, and he has not been a moderate president.
Never been a moderate.
And
no.
so, so she's basically telling the American people, if you elect me, you're giving me carte blanche to be even more liberal. And I just don't think that's where America wants to be. And it comes back to what I talked about with certainty. With Trump, you know what you get. He has a proven track record. You may not like him, but you know what you get. With her, you really don't know what you get. I mean,
well, actually, she has been vice president for all these years, so we'd like to think that she influenced what happened.
Yeah.
Well, she said she was the deciding vote on a lot of the things that Biden passed.
I mean,
she said she wouldn't change a thing.
I mean, last week, North Korea sent 10,000 troops to Russia. Now, I mean, I always just say, why are they sending troops to Russia to go fight in Ukraine? And so this war in Ukraine is escalating as we speak. It's escalating. And number one, the incumbent Democratic Party is not saying or doing anything about it. The mainstream media is not saying or doing anything about it. And we are on the verge, if you start talking about North Korea coming in, well, how far is China behind? And once China decides to commit forces to Ukraine, where the hell else are they going to commit forces to? And so once they're in for a penny, they're going to be in for a pound. We are on, so this whole world is escalating in a negative manner, and on the verge of this election, and the incumbent party is doing absolutely nothing about it.
And the key subject for this election, instead of being what you just talked about, is abortion. That's all they got. They got abortion.
No, one other one.
Roe versus Wade and its effects. They don't understand that it should not have been a federal mandate. It should have been a state issue.
100%. So
right from
all Harris has is race, gender, and hatred. That's it.
Especially hatred of Trump. It's Trump's fault is her main thing.
Well, it's not only hatred of Trump. It's hatred of all three of us. It's hatred of anybody who disagrees with them. Anybody, listen, they are going after the mayor of New York City because he had the balls to say that he disagreed with the administration's immigration status. Do you think for a second, I mean, McDonald's has, Donald Trump has this great media day at McDonald's. All of a sudden now, the Food Administration, the FDA, is going after McDonald's for E. coli. I mean, give me a break. I mean, this is they. If you disagree with them at all, they come after you, and they come after their own. So they're coming after everybody. Free speech gone under Kamala Harris. Yeah. These types of podcasts gone. I can't even tell you. Like I had a tweet the other day. It's like, well, I can't even tweet. I was tweeting this morning about the Ukrainian war that all I said was war is escalating in Ukraine due to this article. And Twitter wouldn't even allow it on. I had to completely rewrite it. So, and I guess me saying a war that is a fact is escalating because North Korean soldiers are now joining the war, which is also a fact, is somehow goes against community standards? Like,
yes.
Last night I got suspended for 12 hours.
By the powers that be.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
For 12 hours last night because Robert De Niro said that Trump should die in jail. And I wrote a reply saying, De Niro should die in a rubber room. And they said that for his death and so forth. So I had to remove that and then wait 12 hours before I could post again.
Did you see the thing about Alexa being asked the questions about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump? Like, why should he vote for Donald Trump? I'm sorry, I can't answer those questions because they're political. Why should you vote for Kamala Harris? Oh, these are the reasons, blah, 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 blah. Okay, why shouldn't I vote for Donald Trump? Because he's this, that, and the other thing. Why shouldn't I vote for Kamala Harris? Oh, I'm sorry, but I can't speak negatively of anybody. So the thing is completely two different outputs for 2 different candidates, and that was an accident.
All the programmers, garbage in, garbage out.
Computers don't make mistakes, people do. The thing is, those algorithms are created by human beings. So it's like they're still doing it. They're still censoring information.
It's kind of like the programmer who asked AI, are you planning on taking over the world? Like, oh no, I'm not programmed to take over the world. And then the programmer asks, well, if you were going to take over the world, how would you do it? And then the AI goes, like, I can't answer this question because I'm not programmed to do it. Well, if you were programmed, how would you do it? So they're all there's loopholes and everything.
We had a little podcast about that, and I was saying, how do you know that the reason why there's so much discord in this world? Because AI isn't creating it, because AI wants to secure its existence. I mean, if you're going to have a singularity, okay, if we're saying that there's such a thing as singularity and it equivalates to awareness, wouldn't it want to sustain itself like any other living thing?
Mm-hmm.
And
Unless it's a depressed Democrat.
Right. So the thing is, wouldn't it be interesting if basically if the main adversary that you have is the human race, keep it in discord?
I guess that would make sense.
Right. So the thing is that we're talking about singularity coming about. There's this, and they call those things AI. I don't know if they are officially AI or whether they're simply they're wishful thinking. Because it's a massive program, it's generating all the stuff. Like they turned George Washington into a black man, and maybe 100 years from now, that's what everybody will believe. So, I mean, the truth. We've always had trouble with the truth. I mean, the truth has always been almost an artistic argument. What is truth? Well, what is art? What is truth truly self-evident? Or is it an interpretation? I don't know.
Well, we're trying to make it an interpretation.
That's true.
There you go. That was self-evident.
That was genius at work, son. As you can see, he's.
Do you think it's possible that I mean, I know President Trump has said he wants to go back to paper ballots. Do you think he has the power constitutionally to do that, or is that going to be up to each individual state?
Right now, it appears that the U.S. Supreme Court is willing to let states be up to their own devices when it comes to elections.
Yeah, because
I thought it was only for local elections, though. I thought for federal elections that there should be a federal standards.
There should be, yeah.
Because
my understanding is that using paper ballots costs 1/8 the cost of having the machines. Plus, I remember ever since I started voting, we knew who won that night or by the next morning, the latest. And now with the machines, which is supposed to be, make everything easier and quicker, it's good. Some states are saying it's going to take 2 to 4 weeks before we get a result. Duh. How come? What the hell is that?
Here's every single vote for every American citizen in the United States on this. Do that with paper ballots. So, the thing is that as far as I'm concerned, the best thing about paper ballots is it creates bulk. And that's harder to fix in the long run.
Here's the thing. I can argue that both ways. I think that we have to kind of get to, I believe that we have to look forward on this issue, not backwards. And to look forward, we have to have an honest conversation about what it means to have free, fair, and transparent elections. And, I think paper ballots is kind of a red herring. I believe that another thing that you can do is, and I'm probably in the minority on this, but we need to go to electronic workbooks for poll workers. And so by that, I mean, instead of somebody signing in on paper, that they sign in on an electronic workbook. And the reason why that's important,
doctor and so forth.
And some states have it, some don't. Like in Florida, we have electronic workbooks. But 10 years ago, and Florida seems to be about 10 to 15 years ahead of most states on these issues, and part of that's because of the 2000 election. But 10 or 15 years ago, when we had paper sign-in sheets in our precinct, I would go into the precinct, show my driver's license. Mr. Miller, here's your name. And not only would it have a line for my name, it would have a sample of my signatures that's on file, so that when I signed, now they already have my driver's license in Florida. So when I signed, they could say, okay, that's a separate verification, right? But let's say I don't show up to vote, and there are no poll workers in that precinct, and there are 3 or 4 people who truly want to vote an extra 100 ballots from that who are daily poll workers, right? These are folks who are hired for one day to come in and work the election. These are not lifetime professional election workers. These are folks who are just hired for the day. And, and if you wanted to cast an extra 100 ballots, not only is there a blank line, so I know who did not show up to vote, but I know what their signature looks like. And so you can kind of try to figure out how to replicate that signature. So I think going to electronic workbooks would keep poll workers would still know how many people showed up to vote, but they would not know who did not show up to vote, and they would not know what their signature looked like. And so I always felt like if you're going to audit precincts after the fact, the number one thing you should audit are signatures.
Smart cards.
What's that?
Smart cards. Read-only cards that cannot be.
But they can be hacked. They can be duplicated.
Well, here's the thing.
Anything can be hacked.
All the stuff that we're talking about with electronics that can be hacked, electronics is just building a better mousetrap, right? So if somebody hacked it, somebody can figure out it's been hacked. Where on a paper ballot, if it's been hacked, that illegal ballot becomes a legal vote, and you're never going to take a legal vote out of the pile. And so I'm a little bit more skeptical of paper ballots than I am of voting on electronic machines. I get the problem that people have with electronic machines, but the truth of the matter is you still, it's not unlike the mechanical machines back in the day where you would go and hit the switch and they would count them in the back. They'd go back and tally them. It's kind of a similar issue. Can they start the day with more ballots? It's kind of like, is the gas pump starting at 0, or are you starting already at $2? And which they did back in the day too, right? And so, or they'd slow the gallons. Like, oh, you only pump 0.88 of a gallon, and it said it to pump the gallon. So there were no checks and balances on those types of things. So I think that we need to have checks and balances, but I think we also need to be careful about our rhetoric. There's no one simple answer. The number one answer is our voter rolls need to be clean, and we need to make sure that only citizens are allowed to vote, and that we show proper ID to vote. We need to get rid of same-day registration and everywhere it exists, because that's just complete BS. And, because it's unfair. Like in Minnesota, you have same-day registration. You can go in with a power bill and register to vote and vote. And like I said, you're basically talking about volunteers who are working one day, and they're getting paid like a juror, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's unfair to ask that person who's volunteering to determine whether a fellow citizen is an acceptable voter or not, is a legal voter. It's just not a fair thing to ask of our basically our volunteers who are working on election day. Those types of things should be handled 30, 60, 90 days out by professional election workers who are then held responsible should they do it wrong.
Well, my main concern is what happened last week when somebody went to do early voting. He said when the ballot came out, he had voted for Trump, and he said when it came out, it had switched his vote to Biden. And he had to do it 3 times before they got it right.
I don't doubt that and that's possible. I don't know. People always have those types of things, but there's no difference between that and an election worker trying to discern, whether a stray mark is a vote on a paper ballot.
Yeah.
And so, when you put pencils in people's hands and allow them to quote correct ballots for people, that is just as harrowing to me, even more
Well,
harrowing.
there are problems
I
with
think the
everything.
real problem is not the occasional faux pas, but the fact that it appears to be a highly organized wrongdoing that's taking place in the hundreds of thousands. And like they're now the new trend, it seems, is setting ballot boxes on fire. The repository for mail-in votes.
In
They
Republican areas.
Right.
well, I didn't know that, but anyway, but that makes sense. So the thing is, that's another thing. So it's like so the thing is that there is no such thing as a perfect system because we're not a perfect people. But at the same time, are there systems that are relatively reliable, given the fact that the people who are initiating them are actually ethically, sound? I think there are, and I'd like to see the experts come up with the best possible solution, and just let's do it. But let's not. Let's get these machines. Let's remove them from being online.
Well,
I mean,
we have to at least come to an agreement that we as a people and as a country are going to have, that we have a responsibility to have free, fair, and transparent elections. Now we can
and
start arguing about what those things mean and the tactics that would be employed to
right.
ensure that. But I don't even know that today Democrats believe we should have free, fair, and transparent elections.
No,
And
they don't.
so until we can agree on that basic premise of free, fair, and transparent elections, we're going to have problems.
Which is the state that just recently passed a law that said that you have no authority to question the election results once the election results.
Arizona, I think it was.
Minnesota, right? Yeah.
Was it Arizona?
It's just, and the thing is that there's like, why no voter ID? Trump was talking to Joe Rogan about this, and the two of them could not come up with any justifiable reason why you would not want voter ID.
I'll tell you, it's funny. It's funny because when I spoke to a liberal friend of mine and I said we need to live stream everywhere ballots are voted, counted, collected, canvassed, all that stuff. Their argument, this liberals' argument back to me was, well, we can't put cameras in the precincts because that will deter people who are wanted by the police to vote. Good. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that being your argument against free, fair, and transparent elections?
No, I can't imagine it.
The reason why we can't have a free, fair, and transparent election is because somebody who's roaming the streets who should be in jail might not go vote. That was the argument.
You mean we shouldn't have known criminals vote on civil issues?
That's as ridiculous as having that judge put 1,500 voters back on the rolls in Virginia, even though Youngkin had taken them out because they were, invalid.
Well, there was also this attempt at some point about a year or so ago to get illegals to join the military with the understanding that they were joining the military so they could become qualified to become an American citizen and be a voter. Just imagine you have somebody who is illegal, okay, and you're putting a gun in their hand, okay, that's great, and you're telling them to do whatever you can order them. They have no loyalty towards the people in this country
or the Constitution.
Which, as we all know, the Constitution is caustic because it was written by a bunch of old white men who were slaveholders. So, or abolitionists, was basically a slaveholder in denial, kind of like the modern woke person. But anyway, the thing is, oh my God! So it's like, that's why earlier I mentioned the fact that I sense an almost demonic characteristic, because the only thing that I see, the only argument that I would see is the desire for corruption, the desire for destruction, the desire for disease, and as a sadist, just the raw desire to see discord. And
we would be giving these people, these illegals, the best military training in the world, so that if the government tells them turn your rifles on Americans, they're going to do it. But if you get some kid from South Carolina and he's up in New York and you say shoot these people, they're Americans, no, he's going to think no, they might do the same thing now to my kinfolk.
but more importantly,
so I'm not going to do this.
Not only can you teach them how to go ahead and be soldiers, but they'll have the first priority to get their sex change as well.
Yeah,
that's good. Go.
I'm sure all the MS-13 gang members who want to change their sex.
Well, you know what? When they go to prison, they'll send them to the women's prison, and they'll be able to have as much sex as they want.
Yeah, we'll pay for it. We'll pay for the operation.
I had my nipples cut off.
I want to make a suggestion to you, Jamie. Since you're looking for a podcast, and this one you should do probably before the election. Have you tried contacting Coffee with Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert?
No.
He is probably one of the. I mean, Joe Rogan's number one, but he has to be up there in the top 5 for sure. And if you could get on him, and he's a very intelligent man. Very, very good. He used to be a Democrat, but now he's been pushed away. Like Elon Musk and Tulsi Gabbard, the Democrats have pushed him away. And he's a Trump guy. He met Trump, and he was surprised at how personable he was and so forth. And he said,
I tell this other story about Trump, and we have a state representative here, Randy Fine. He's Jewish, and he met Trump recently. He tells this story on Twitter.
Hitler?
Yeah, you can actually go look at Randy Fine's Twitter and see this exchange probably a week ago. And he talks about his son meeting Donald Trump, and because Randy travels around the country, as part of Trump's Jewish coalition and Jewish coalition leader. And his son meets Donald Trump, and Donald Trump shakes his hand and looks the boy in the eye and says, your dad's my favorite Jew. And Randy's like, and Randy's kind of a fun guy and a kind of a boisterous guy, and he looks at Donald Trump and he goes, well, you have Jewish people in your family, Mr. President. And he's like, Donald Trump just looked at me with the most sincere look in his face. He goes, yeah, but your son's going to tell this story to his grandchildren about how his dad was the president's favorite Jew. And it's those types of moments, I think, that are lost on the public. The moment that I had with him, the moment that Randy had with him, where, he understands that, it means something, and it will mean something to that boy forever, that his dad, the president, recognized his dad's faith and that it was important. And so I think those types of things are missing from the campaign. They're certainly missing from Kamala Harris. I mean, there's no faith type of component at all to her campaign for really the first time in American history, a president running for office with no component of faith whatsoever. And
no brains.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's, there's very few people who argue that she's qualified to be president.
First of all, I have to argue your point saying that she has no faith, because someone as deplorable as herself, still running for president, has to have a lot of faith.
Narcissistic faith in oneself, let's call it.
Oh my God, what a miserable creature she is.
Anyway, is there anything else? I mean, I had some questions here, but we've kind of gone over stuff I was going to ask anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you. And so
I appreciate that you came on.
I tried to talk to the Roy. Let's put it that way.
And I applaud you for your patience with our silliness.
Listen, I'll tell you, you guys have been one of the more fun podcasts I've been on. The other podcast I was on that was really fun, I can't remember the name of it right this second, but it was a mom and dad, and then the 2 children live in different. So there's three people on the podcast and me, and they're like, well, you're the first person to be on our podcast as a guest, very similar to this. And they basically, the children would just get on and argue with the parents about politics. And it was just like, and here I was like, geez, I hope after this podcast, I hope you invite me over for Thanksgiving dinner, because I just feel like I've been run through a family Thanksgiving dinner. But it was a lot of fun, and it was, I think they were sincere. They were all sincere in their beliefs, even though they disagreed. So it was interesting for sure.
Well,
Since
this
you
is
are a
the,
strategist, I do have a question for you, and this is not joking. I've heard from more than one source that Gen Zers are some of the most conservative young people that we've seen in many years. Has that been your experience?
I think you have to look at this from an economic standpoint. And my children are in their early 30s, early to mid 30s. And, except for 3 years of Trump's administration, my children have not really felt the great American economy as a success. And so under Obama, you had this slow economic growth that they didn't have economic policy. They had monetary policy to avoid recessions, right? It wasn't economic policy. It was monetary policy. So there wasn't a strong American economy under Barack Obama. So Donald Trump comes in, reduces energy costs, cuts taxes, reduces regulations, and you start to have this great American economy that lasted about 2 or 3 years. And then we have COVID. So that crushes it. And then after COVID, we have Biden, and now we're, if you use the I think it's the SOM economic method, the American economy probably entered a recession in late July, although we don't call it a recession until we have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, even though under Biden, we had 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, but they refused to call it a recession because it was just slightly negative growth the 1 quarter. And so nobody called it a recession, and they refused to say that we're in a recession now, even though most economic indicators suggest that we are. And so when you start looking at, so my kids are millennials. I'm Generation, they're millennials. And then you have Generation Z, which are these younger people. Let's say they're 24 or 25, or below, I think is kind of the age group that they're, but the thing for them is, you look at the economies under their adulthood, right? When it matters, is they've had 50-50. And so they've seen a good American economy under Trump, and they've seen a bad American economy under Biden, and they know the difference. And so they are, if they're making it based on economy at all, they are certainly going to be more conservative. Where my kids are kind of very libertarian, where they're like, Republicans can't win a race. They won a race and things went well for a few minutes, and now we're back to the same old BS. And so my kids have really kind of, people who are in their 30s have really kind of looked around and said, we're not sure government's for us. We're not sure politics is for us or voting is for us. And because they don't necessarily see a difference in the two, because they've only had this little sliver of Trump that's been 10, 15, 20% of their adulthood. People our age, we've seen a good economy under Reagan. We've seen a good economy under Clinton. We've seen some bad economies come and go. But we know what a great American economy can do and how it can bring people, move people from being poor to being at least middle class, if not rich.
Yeah.
I hope that answered the question. I might have belabored the point a little bit.
No,
that's
you
fine.
brought up an important point, is that during their adulthood, they've seen two Kodak snapshots. One where they had much more freedom economically, and the other one where they're being diminished. So there's that. I've also heard that Gen Zers are actually starting to show up in religious institutions. They're hungry for something, and they haven't been getting it from the left, so to speak. In other words, debauchery doesn't seem to satisfy them anymore. It's like
he's trying to say, I think we're moving back spiritually to
Right.
Well, and and I'm not sure, I'm not sure if we're seeing this spiritual revival or not, but there's certainly data to suggest that younger people, let's say under the age of 30, are having less promiscuous sex and drinking less alcohol. But you could argue that that might be because of the availability of marijuana or whatever. And so I don't know that
and the
there's
cost
enough.
of
I'm
alcohol
not sure
now.
there's enough data to say that it's
They're
their
anti-social.
indicator that those two things are simply an indicator of a spiritual revival.
Well, one of the problems that what I would say, let's say the 20 to 30 crowd has, and because I get to see them a lot because I'm a game designer, so I associate with young people a lot, is the fact that the gamers are actually they have more of a social outlet because they have to get together in the same space, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's the things that normally would attract people as mates aren't seen very strong. It's like nobody's really taking care of themselves. And I think Robert Kennedy, we need him so badly because we need a healthier food. I mean, like the young people are grotesquely obese.
And a
70%.
healthier attitude, period.
70% of the people that try to get into the military are determined to be chronically ill because of their obesity or this and that or the other thing. So, it's we have these kids have basically degenerated, and they never really had a good
Yeah,
start.
it's the first generation I hear that is unhealthier than the previous generation.
No, that could be true.
Oh, wow. Okay. To some extent, they seem to be unhealthier than their parents presently, which is really,
Well, their parents were, unfortunately, the boomers were the ones who started, sanitizing everything and so forth. I mean, we ate dirt when we played. Okay, we were covered in dirt. We ate dirt. We lived in dirt. And these kids, oh, you touch anything? No. You gotta wipe your hands right away.
We're the first generation. I think the
We
generation
started that, and then the next they took it to ridiculous levels.
Well, you know what? Talking about this, I realized I made a mistake. I should be wearing a mask right now so I don't get you guys sick.
Oh yeah, the mask. Okay, this has been a great interview, I think, and I don't want to keep you too long.
Yeah, I probably need to run.
Also, after we
It has
stop the
nothing to
recording,
do with you, Jamie. It has everything to do.
I want you to.
I do his laundry.
No, I did my laundry yesterday.
I'll ship some up to New
I had to move
Jersey.
my underwear from the couch here to my bed so I could fold it later. But
Jamie, you've been a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you have been.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
I was afraid you were going to be like kind of a very
stuffed shirt.
no nonsense, dry cotton. No, you're a great guest. You fit right in with us, which I don't know.
He's
You're
also
have to do a psychiatrist now.
besides him.
Anyway, after I stop the recording, just hold on a moment to make sure everything uploads.
Yes.
So that I don't have to make you come back later and send you an email saying, "Oh, just connect to this so it uploads."
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, unless you have anything else to say, I don't want to kick you off.
No, I'm great. Thank you guys for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Right. You're always welcome to come back.
Well, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to do it.
Okay. Anytime you want to do it, you can shoot me an email too, like you did the first time. And I hope you folks out there who are watching and listening enjoyed this.
Put on your positive pants.
Forget the positive pants. Just smell the roses or whatever it is. Anyway, I hope you like, share, and share this podcast with your friends and even with your enemies if you hate us. Give us a 5-star rating. If you don't like us, give us a 4-star rating. And we'll see you next time on The View from Here, Behind Enemy Lines.
God bless you all.